Right guys, welcome back to the channel. In this one what we're going to be doing is fitting a pair of double leaf springs to the back of the van. So this is a Citroen Relay, so it also applies to Peugeot, Boxer and Fiat Ducato vans. So let's go ahead, let's take a look. So under the vehicle, as you can see, it's single leaf, just standard setup on the suspension. So we changed these for double leaf. I'll put new shock absorbers on as well while I'm under here. Obviously I'll measure the height beforehand and just show you that before we take it apart. So what we're going to do is jack it up, one jack either side under the axle to get it up high enough. So we'll do it on both sides of the axle, just under there. We'll jack it up, put a chock under the front wheel, put the van in gear as well. And then I'll put the axle stands, I'll show you where I'm going to put them. So at the front here, next to where your spring mounts, goes through there. I'll put the axle stand, when it's jacked up, under just here, on that piece there, that flat piece. So obviously we need to get at this to remove it and put the new one in. So it's got to sit on there, as you see. So as you can see, this is the standard height, and that is, at the moment, is 77 centimetres, as it is standard. So we'll see how much that changes obviously when we fit the double leaves. So before we bother putting the axle stands here, what I'm going to do is I've just got it jacked up both sides of the axle just to get a bit more height on it. And then what we're going to do is undo these nuts, these 24mm nuts. That's a 19 on there, just takes a normal socket on those, and that's a 24 on this side of the big nut. So we've got to crack them undone, and you can actually just wind the nut nearly all the way off. So as we know they're going to actually come undone, and we'll do the same with everything else, like these rear bolts on the back, to make sure everything comes undone first. Because these are tight here. If you've got an impact gun, 1/2 inch, you might be able to undo them, but to break them undone, they're very tight. So you need a decent breaker bar on them to undo them, and make sure you've soaked them with some spray, penetrating spray, before you bother trying to undo them. So we got the rear one slackened off there, just the nuts resting on there, and I've undone that handful of turns as well. So this it's undone, so these brackets here can move if need be. So just leave the nut on there like that. And I'll say we've got the trolley jacks under it. We haven't put the axle stands in place yet. Just wanted to crack all them undone, make sure, because they're tight, and it saves doing it when it's just resting on axle stands with no wheels on it. So what we do now is get it up in the air and then just remove the wheels. So obviously we removed the wheels, and then what we did is we got the shocker off. So that's top bolt there, and then the bottom bolt is down here like that. So we've undone them, and then what we've done is undone the spring clamps off the axle, just those 22mm nuts on the bottom. So we've undone that on both of them. Obviously we've got trolley jacks holding the axle up there to stop it falling or anything. So we've taken those clamps off one either side there, and then you've got a plate there that's just sat on the axle as well. So we do that on both sides, and then it'll just leave obviously the spring in place, which we've already undone the nuts on, so we know that's going to come off. So we've done the same on the passenger side. Now you do is you can just lever this clip off here that holds the handbrake cable in place. You put that back on later, just get a screwdriver and just get that off. So now we've undone that, what we've done is let the two jacks down, so it's taken the tension off, the axle's down, the spring's down like that now instead of being up. And now we're going to remove the bolts out of the end of the spring and the front and the back of the spring basically. Obviously you got that cover sat on there as well, you see, just resting there. Just leave that there for now. We'll get them bolts out. Might need just to undo the nut and then get a punch, hit it through with a hammer, and then get a punch and then just knock the bolt through. So once you remove the bolt out the back and the one out the front, then all you can do is, if the axles drop down enough so there's no tension on anything, you can just literally lift that spring out and just put it out, take it out the back. So we just do that on the other side, and that's then both springs off. So here we have the double leaf springs, as you can see. We got new clamps and new bolts, spring brackets, and then bolts and shock absorbers. So put this on. Now the old plate that come off of here, which is this one, what you need to do is clean up in there where that nut sits, so it can sit over that nut, so that'll be full of dirt in there, so it just drops over there like that, as it should, before you fit it on. So we get this on there. Obviously what we're going to do is put some grease on the bolts, on the shaft of the bolts as well, before we put them through, to stop them seizing up inside the ends there. Just help it if you ever want to get it off again at a later date or anything like that. So what I did first was just slid the new spring into the front there, and just put the bolt through and put the nut on the other side, and then same at the back, just got it in position here, just put the bolt through and put the nut on it, and then while it's loose still, I'll put these clamps on here with this plate, and then underneath this spring there's a nut that drops into a hole. Just make sure that's lined up so it's actually in the right place on the axle. So that's what I've done there. I've put the top bolt in the shock absorber, but the shock absorber is just hanging loose at the minute, like that. Obviously I'll put grease on all the bolts as well. So that's how we've done it. So the axle's still obviously just on the jack there, and then we'll just do the other side, and then once that's all done up, we just leave it all loose for the time being, get everything in there and leave all the bolts loose until we're ready to tighten it and nip them up before we obviously drop it down. So we've got this side in now, same as the other side. We just put the front one in first, and then the back one, left them loose, and then put in over the U-clamps. Then got the nuts on, left them loose, and then what we've done is just jacked up the axle and make sure that peg on the bottom of the spring is going into the hole both sides. So this side under there, and the same the other side. Make sure you've got that lined up and it drops into that hole before we tighten up these the four bolts there on the U-clamps. We tighten them up before we tighten up obviously the ones on the springs, so we leave them until it's probably on the ground to tighten them up properly. Do those first. So we got the bottom shock absorber bolts in and tightened up, and so does the top one. So we've done the top one first, then the bottom one. Then we got the clamps round, the U-clamps round, and the nuts on them with the washers, and they're tightened up. And then what we've done is tighten down the bolts at the front and the back, tighten them down just before they go tight, just leave them slightly slack. And then what we'll do is obviously put the wheels on and then lift it back up, get out the axle stands, and then lower it down on the floor, and then just finally nip up the front bolts and the rear spring bolts. So obviously we got the wheels back on now, then jacked it back up to get the wheels on, and then take your axle stands out after that. And as you can see now, the clearance here before, the bump stop was tight on, resting on the top of that plate on top of the spring. When it had a single leaf on it, there was no clearance whatsoever, so the suspension wasn't doing anything because it was hard on the bump stops. So as you can see now, the clearance there. So the difference between it, the amount of room there is now. So that was tight on it and it was squashing the bump stop down before. So here we have the after on the wheel. As you can see, the amount of clearance we've got now. So it was 77 before measurement, afterwards it's 84, so 77, now it's 84 centimetres. So as you can see, the clearance is massive in comparison, so it gives it loads more room than it was before. Before it was right down, like down here. So as you see there, the height difference on that was 2 inches basically. It lifted it 2 inches, and that is with a camper conversion in the van, so it's fully loaded all the time. So with the standard leaf spring setup, the bump stops were hard on the top of the springs, so there was effectively no suspension travel at all. So that's why I fitted the double leaves to raise it. As you see, it raised it back up right away, so the bump stops were nowhere near the top of the springs again. So it also lifted it 2 inches, and that's with it with the camper conversion in the back of the van. So obviously it's a fully loaded van. Now obviously because it lifted it that extra height, now it's pointing downhill towards the front. So now what I've got to do now is obviously lift the front up to compensate for the back being higher now than the front, to give it more clearance on the front, to level the van out effectively. So anyway, if you found the video helpful, remember to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more van related content. Till next one, I'll see you then.